them of her motherly support and encouragement at all times towards becoming great future leaders of the country. The First Lady stated this in a New Year message during the 2019-2020 Christmas and New Year Children's Party organized in their honor at the banquet hall of the Presidential Villa, Abuja.
I'm very happy I came to Villa, and I want to thank our Excellency the First Lady, Miss Aisha Muhammadu Buhari. I want to thank her for allowing us to express joy.
I want to thank you, Lord, for allowing me to live up to this new year.
I want to use this opportunity to thank Miss Aisha Muhammadu Buhari for organizing this memorable and historical event.
The lives of 13 traffic controller officers in Abuja have been transformed remarkably after decades of selfless service. Fortune unexpectedly smiled on them after years of hard work to humanity.
I don't expect seeing something like this, but it just came. So I'm very, very happy.
And I also want my fellow Nigerian police, those on the road, to know that whatever we are doing on the road that people are watching, we should put more effort.
If you want Nigeria to have more good schools, start from your community, let's contribute. If you want Nigeria to have good and safe environment, encourage the security personnel around you, whether you're getting man, anywhere. Let's think of how you should build a Nigeria of our dream.
And elsewhere, an opposition party candidate and former Prime Minister Umaru Sissoco Embalo has been declared winner of the 2019 runoff presidential elections in Guinea-Bissau.
Domingos Simões Pereira got 254,468 votes, equivalent of 46.4%, while Umaru Sissoco Embalo polled 293,536 votes, representing 53.5%. The CNE hereby declares the candidate Umaru Sissoco Embalo as the winner of the election.
And that is the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Jumai and Claire after this break. Good morning.
20 years of travel and counting. 20 years of promoting tourism in Africa and diaspora. Over 3 million kilometers traveled. Over 30 African countries visited. Explored the diaspora in 4 continents. Connected over 100,000 happy tourists to Africa. Reached over 50 million homes. Igniting smiles across Africa and beyond. As Goge Africa turns 20, we thank you and invite you to join us in the quest for 20 must-visit destinations in partnership with the largest TV network in Africa, the NTA, Ministry of Information and Culture, Ministry of Transportation, Lagos State Government, Canon, Delta Airlines, Royal Caribbean, Tour Brokers International. You too can still be a partner. Call the numbers on your screen or info@gogeafrica.tv. Goge Africa, celebrating 2 decades of heritage, travel and tourism.
Ha! Not so fast. Look, I'm tired. I want to check out of this country for greener pastures.
Just calm down for a moment. Please sit down.
Do you have a job where you're going to? No, but someone is arranging,
Listen, Alinko. Checking out of this country without proper planning means one thing. Unimaginable begin.
You know, I've been in the diaspora, but legitimately doing great things at home and abroad. As I've been saying, without the proper footing abroad, the risk is not worth it. Listen, Alinko, it's better to be home than be trapped abroad or even end up in prison.
My name is Giato Adeza Adams, the General Manager, Corporate and Strategic Communications, Nigerian Port Authority. As regards the land borders closure, available statistical data from APMT, which is one of our terminal operators that is involved in container handling the terminal, has recorded an increase of 200 TEUs of cargoes into their terminal as a result of cargo diversion from the vessels originally meant for neighboring countries. That shows you that the terminal operators is going to have an increase in revenue, which is accrued to the terminal, and at the same time, Nigerian Port Authority will equally benefit from the revenue-led increase. So that is the benefit we have derived from the border closure.
Thanks for rejoining us. There are business articles that stood out in 2019. Now, let's take a walk back into 2019 and relive some moments with Kolo Muhammad as our guide on business news.
Hello and welcome. Come along with me on a journey down the business path of 2019. Therein, we shall relive some moments, especially those that stood out in shaping our business sector in 2019. First, let's remind you of the absence of possibility of raising rates anytime soon. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria has either maintained or downward reviewed finance or business rates lately.
The committee noted the developments in the monetary aggregates and enjoined the bank to initiate moves towards improving lending to the private sector and urged other intermediary institutions in the financial sector to support these initiatives by improving their credit delivery to boost output growth.
The Corporate Affairs Commission has also worked to reduce charges of business registration and also decentralize the process to cut down time taken to finish registration. With rates maintained or reduced, it hands prospective global and domestic investors assurance of huge gains if they invest in the new Nigerian business environment.
Buying a lot of things online. We are getting our themes online for developing websites. We are doing our social media adverts online. Everything that we basically do is online as a digital marketer. So the reduced price from the CBN government is actually going to help us a whole lot. And I like the fact that the government is actually helping not only the entire country, but also small business owners as well, especially people who are running digital marketing agencies.
And Nigeria plans to upward review its crude oil reserves from 37 billion barrels to about 40 billion barrels when its new frontier basins come on stream. Huge sums and 21st century technology is being employed in the basins on the trail of commercial quantity hydrocarbon.
Any serious government actually has to go into this kind of things, the issue of going into other basins that are not Niger Delta to find out the possibility of getting oil. Any government that is interested in the unity of the country.
The New Year's holiday officially ends today. The equities market will open afterwards. NTA Business News will bring you closing figures subsequently. My name is Kolo Muhammad. This is wishing Nigeria a peaceful, progressive and prosperous 2020.
All right, many thanks to you, Kolo Muhammad, for that beautiful package of the business news. And as you can see, I'm holding up one of the newspapers. That's to show you that newspaper review is coming up next in a moment.
And Bayo Atiobi, our GMN newspaper reviewer, is here. Good morning, Bayo.
Good morning.
Good to see you as always.
Yes,
Morning,
yes, thank
Bayo.
you.
I
Good morning,
thought the weather was extremely windy and cold this
Yes,
morning, but not too cold for you to get out of bed.
Well, you have to get out of bed. But you see, Hamatan is here, and having relaxed for Christmas and New Year, people normally want to relax at home, but the weather has to take its toll.
Well, I'm not really feeling the cold coming from Maiduguri, you know.
Yes.
It's extreme.
Yes.
Maiduguri, it's just like AC cold now, yes.
Yes,
Kano,
Kebbi,
Adamawa, yeah.
And strangely too,
extremely
Zaria
cold.
and Jos can also be very cold.
First time I went to Maiduguri, I know that you were in Maiduguri then. That was the first time I had my experience of sandstorm.
Yeah, sandstorm.
It was extremely cold. But it was a nice experience, Bayo.
Yes, it can be very frightening.
Right, let's begin with the
Yes,
newspaper.
so we begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Just below the masthead, criminals bent on unleashing terror. That's coming from Northern Governors. You find that story on page 3. Nigerians want further cut as new bank charges commences. That story is on page 13. I have no rift with Governor Ganduje. That's coming from Abdul Miminu Jibrin. And the headlines there, we see them. Passengers groan under transportation problems in FCT. 102 high-capacity buses grounded. You can see the picture story there, people scrambling to get, into a taxi cab. And it was really, really, an empty street during the festive season.
Yes,
and getting a taxi
I'm
was a
wondering
problem.
what area of the FCT, this...
Yes, they said, okay, commuters struggled to board unpainted cabs and an Abuja Transport commercial bus at the city center. That's the city center, And at the bottom plate of the Daily Trust newspaper, 79-year-old man, 3 others in police net over rape cases. That's a very, 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 very sad situation. You find that story on page 4. Borno governor begins 2020 with launch of 5 projects. You find that story on page 6. 1 million rice farmers ready for dry season farming. Dry season production. That story is on page 27. That's a very good move in the agricultural sector. What do you think, Claire?
Always a good move in the agricultural sector. But Bayo, I think it's the right time we brought you in here.
Yes.
Take a look at some of the stories that she's just read from the Daily Trust.
Well, the one that catches my attention is that of transportation.
Yes.
In the Federal Capital Territory, there's supposed to be these long buses that help commuting persons from the suburbs into the city. In the past, there used to be mini buses, but the mini buses have been confined to the satellite area. Of recent, as part of the policy of FCDA to sanitize the transport system, some of the tricycles were limited. Motorcycles already have been consigned to the satellite towns. The challenge, therefore, now is that there are very few functioning government long buses to commute passengers, and therefore people now have to resort to private taxis, unpainted taxis. If you recall, just about a month ago, the FCDA task force was going down the street arresting unpainted taxis. The danger now is that there are few vehicles, commercial vehicles, available for people to commute.
Yes.
And you have a lot of people committing up and down every now and then. If you are going
102 high-capacity buses.
Yes, along Kubwa Road, you see them all parked there. All stuck, not moving. So
some people have argued that sometimes we tend to put the cart before the horse. That we could have considered the availability and capacity of the FCT to provide some of these commercial buses before effecting the relocation of the tricycles that we normally call keke napep and all that. Good policy, good move, at least to sanitize the city center. But now the repercussion is what we're seeing.
Yes, and the minister was saying that it was a very hard decision to come by because, he knows a lot of people are going to suffer, but it needs to be done so that they can bring sanity to our roads here in Abuja.
Even using motorcycles for transportation became a matter of necessity.
Yes.
If there were adequate buses, adequate taxis, nobody would risk his life boarding a motorcycle for a means of transportation. It became a matter of necessity because of the inadequacies. If therefore you are going to make rules to restrict this mode of transportation, you must make sure that the alternative, the better alternatives are available.
Yes,
exactly.
it's already in place.
Another issue, Jume and Bayo, is the fact that over 100 of those buses are grounded at the same time. Now that speaks a lot to our
maintenance culture.
And whose responsibility is it anyway to see to attend to the buses?
There is the private transportation system under the supervision of the Federal Capital Territory Administration. And the challenges has been that the buses have been old, they've been there. The FCDA was managing it to make sure that it is not exploitative. And the private operators too were trying to make sure that it was economical and profitable. So in between the two, you have the buses aging and lack of maintenance, consigning many of them to their garage.
Even you hardly see the yellow and yellow and blue taxis?
No, you don't see them.
You hardly see them. There are a few in number.
Yes.
Across the city center. All right, Bayo, any other story you want to take before I take?
Usually when there is a new year, there is the first baby of the year. The first lady, Aisha Buhari, was at the Gwagwa Primary Health Center, where the first baby of the year, baby Muhammad Sani, was delivered on the dot at 12 midnight. The First Lady was represented by the spouse of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Salamatu Gbajabiamila. She welcomed baby Muhammad and others born on New Year Day with gifts. And the baby Muhammad is one of 26,039 that UNICEF said will be born yesterday.
Yes. You know, I was just sharing with Jinjume. I was wondering why I didn't have any of my babies on the first of any of the years. You know, and I think I'm going to plan that.
Yes, it's not too late to plan.
It's not too late
to what?
Well, talking about new babies.
Yes.
New babies enter, and life also has its doors for exit. The oldest soldier faded away yesterday. Nigeria's oldest surviving soldier faded away. He is Pa Adamu Aduku.
Surviving soldier from
the World War.
World War.
Wow.
Okay.
He was aged 101 years.
That's a celebration of life.
Yes. In fact, he was celebrated in 2018 when the Vice President gave him some award. Pa Aduku, he's now a great-great-grandfather, was born in 1918 at Abejukolo in Maha local government area of Kogi State. He joined the army under the joint Nigerian contingent of the British colonial army and fought in the World War in Burma and Egypt. Old soldiers, they say, never die. They only fade away. I hope we has faded away to rest in peace.
Amen. You know, so sometimes it's so touchy and also heartwarming to know that we still find people who have longevity, you know, despite the challenges, you know, of effective healthcare provision and all that. And we really need to seek out some of these, you know, living legends, you know, to take a cue from them, inquire from them what is the secret behind their longevity. But
what we actually have lost is his reminiscence of the era of the World War and his experiences.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. All right, Bayo, let me quickly take a look at the Daily Sun. Daily Sun, of course, is, you know, again, reflecting on the, you know, New Year agenda for Mr. President. The Daily Sun captures its lead story as Ohaneze Afenifere Middle Belt Forum, all set agenda for Buhari. And there's a writer too, Balarabe Musa Kokore, others as well. That's the lead story from the Daily Sun. Of course, it has a very busy page. And just below that lead story, you find again the babies of the year. This one is the first to be delivered at the Olabisi Onabanjo University Teaching Hospital. That's in Shagamu, Ogun State. And you see the First Lady or wife of the Governor of the state, Bamidele Abiodun, of course, with two of the babies delivered there. We also find others in Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Ibadan, Oyo, also on that front page. Now, just below that, our story on eviction of High Commission in Ghana. Federal government is giving its own side of the story. And, quite a number of other stories on the front page. Minimum wage, NLC direct state councils to stand by over deadline. You can find the stories right there. And then Abia 2030, Isukwato leaders insist on governorship. It's also trending there. But just a little on the side of the nameplate, you find we are shopping for South President. Arewa youths, of course, and northern governors committed to united Nigeria. That's coming from the, of course, northern governors, chairman and governor of Plateau State, Simon Ladong, there. All right, Bayo.
Yes, talking about agenda, the president has indicated that 2020, the beginning of this decade, and particularly for this year, 47 critical projects will be completed. And that has a dual purpose. First of all, it puts everybody in the nation on attention about the programs that the government intend to complete in this year. And we are going to note them and take them on it. The second aspect of it is that, if you recall, before the ministers were sworn in, they were also given their targets and the agenda. and the secretary to the government of the federation is the one to monitor and ensure that they achieve them. And therefore, for these 47 projects and all items that have been so identified, it becomes a target that has been set for those who are responsible for those ministries and for those projects to ensure that they meet the expectation.
And they gave the scorecard of their 100 days in office.
Yes. The other area also was where President Muhammadu Buhari has reiterated that he's withdrawing from political contest in 2023. As obvious and as constitutional as that is, I think it became necessary to reiterate that because in the immediate past there have been subtle attempts to amend the constitution to make attempts at third term. Those have been denied in the public and had actually continued subtly behind the scene. And eventually, thanks to Providence, it was killed at the National Assembly. And this time, this is a confirmation that there will be no such subtle subversion of the Constitution. And therefore, when you read the story, Claire read the story about preparations, about where the next candidate should come for 2023, already politicians, they say, are always preparing for the next election.
Exactly.
All right, let's quickly take a look at the editorial. And that's, of course, given bearing other stories of interest. The editorial is on Nigeria's $15 billion annual loss to tax evasion. And it's the Blueprint editorial bio. This, of course, the revelation was, made by the former chairman of the FIRS to the fact that Nigeria, loses about $15 billion, dollars annually to tax evasion. And this paper has described it as, mind-boggling and deplorable. And of course, it's also, Fowler was said to have, announced that Nigeria would begin to implement the first automatic exchange of information standard this year. And the regime was part of Nigeria's commitment to improve transparency in tax administration, increase tax revenue collection, enhance effectiveness and efficiency service delivery. So the crux of this editorial is that it is urging the FIRS to evoke sections 49 subsection 2AD of its Establishment Act, which authorizes the agency to proceed against and punish every officer, manager, director, secretary, or any person concerned with the management of any defaulting company in like manner as, if she or he had committed the offense.
Okay. Well, before I go to can I quickly refer to the story you provided clarification for yesterday, and that is the ECO currency.
Okay.
Now, experts have advised Nigeria that it is not yet time for Nigeria to join that currency. Presently, like you pointed out yesterday, 8 French colonies in the West Africa have adopted ECO as their currency. This is apparently exchanging what was safer before for ECO. And the experts are saying that it is not yet time for Nigeria to join. In fact, they pointed out that the main criteria for arriving at a common currency have actually not been met by many of the states.
Yes,
and
that's the convergence.
Yes.
There are 2 levels of convergence.
Yes.
The first, the primary, and the secondary. Yes.
And therefore, they advise that Nigeria should not risk that. As at now, they are saying that the Naira should continue to be our medium currency of exchange, and we should not be tempted to join the France subtle labeled ECO that has been adopted.
No, but we're not going to join the France.
Yes.
It's
an ECOWAS
the
currency.
Anglophone, whatever.
Of ECOWAS.
Yes, I mean there were plans to harmonize both the CFA France and the new ECOWAS ECO, into a common currency. But the francophone countries have gone ahead, to adopt the ECO as their own the name of the currency.
They know Nigeria will give a soft landing for whatever will arise from that. We don't want to have just the way the Brexit is going. I don't think Nigeria will need to really understand the terms first before joining, so that we don't have a Naira. Is it Naira exit or what we'll call our own?
No, I think the plan was to harmonize both, the Anglophone and the CFA, to have a common currency for West Africa. For West Africa.
You see, under the ECOWAS, there were plans since 2004 to have a common currency for the community. But there were criteria that were to be met by member states. And one of them is at least inflation rate less than 5%, budget deficit not less than 3%, foreign reserve to cover 3 months of worth of exports and others. Many of these have not been met, but 8 of the French colonies who belong to the CFA have now adopted what they call their own ECO. And the experts are saying this is a transmutation of CFA that is backed by France as a medium of exchange under the guise of ECO, and they are cautioning Nigeria to be very careful not to double in this.
All right, Bayo, it's a developing story that experts will really need to look at the implication of that, you understand, on the common ECOWAS currency, which is also known as ECO, or which has been adopted. ECO is the name that has been adopted for it. So, like you said, it's a developing story that we have to.
On taxation, and the essence of taxation is that if budget deficit is to be eliminated, there must be tremendous revenue generated by government to meet its budget commitments. And where are those going to come from? One of the key areas is also tax. And therefore, where there are challenges of people avoiding and not paying tax, it becomes a matter of serious challenge for the Federal Inland Revenue Service. You recall that during the last tenure of the former chairman, there was a moment of respite for people to come to voluntary, it was called V8, you remember, voluntary asset declaration. And that helped tremendously. And this determination, this time around, going to about a quantum of about $15 billion is a quantum of revenue that Nigeria cannot afford to let go. And therefore...
Bayo, we just have to stop here at this. Yes, I didn't raise my yellow card, but I have to raise it here. Thank you, Bayo. We'll see you again tomorrow, God willing.
All right.
This is Good Morning Nigeria. Let's take a break now. When we come back, we'll, of course, set the tone for our conversation.
They swore an oath to serve our fatherland and defend the people. They traded their freedom, comfortable homes, and mortgaged their lives on the battleground for our unity and peaceful living. These are the great, fearless, loyal, and committed Nigerian armed forces who risked their lives courageously to safeguard our borders. But in the line of duty, many never returned. Nigerians, arise, let's celebrate our fallen heroes. Put on the remembrance emblem with pride to support the incapacitated and families of our fallen heroes.
It is indeed befitting to honor the memory of the gallant hearts of young men who paid the supreme sacrifice to keep the country united.
President Muhammadu Buhari enjoins all ministries, parastatals, religious and corporate bodies to donate generously to the Emblem Appeal Launch. Send your donations to these accounts. Account name, Emblem Appeal Launch. Account number 393-200-7526. EcoBank Nigeria PLC.
Nigeria is our country, and it's the only country we have. Irrespective of religion, tribe, the heroes of our past did their best to take Nigeria to where it is today. It would be unfortunate, I repeat, unfortunate, absolutely, if we don't keep Nigeria intact. We must put our differences behind. We must let everybody know that human beings cannot live together without some differences. But at the end of the day, our country is Nigerian. It must always come first.
Get ready for the Unity Challenge reality TV show. Coming soon.
We have come to the end of another successful year, and we wish to appreciate all those that mean so much to us: our sponsors, our clients, government at all levels, corporate bodies, advertisers, religious bodies, civil society groups, political parties, and above all, you, our esteemed viewer. Together, we made 2019 great. Together, we shall make 2020 even greater. That is why we say, thank you. This is wishing you Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year.
You're welcome back to Good Morning Nigeria, and we shall be discussing on justice sector in 2020. And to set the tone for our conversation, let's take this background report by Dele Atumbi.
The judiciary, no doubt, has been described as the last hope of the common man, where justice is expected to be dispensed in accordance with the law as it is. As a way of maintaining law and order, judicial pronouncements in accordance with the rule of law must be obeyed. During the course of the year, a sitting Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Walter Onoge, was arraigned before the Code of Conduct Tribunal over non-declaration of assets. The presiding officer at the tribunal, Danladi Umar, found Justice Onoge guilty of the 2-count charge. The National Judicial Council, exercising its power, recommended the immediate retirement of the indicted Chief Justice of Nigeria and the appointment of Justice Ibrahim Tanko Muhammad as his replacement. The justice sector witnessed the continuation of the trial of alleged corruption cases, with 23 former governors standing trial in various courts across the country, with one of them, Oji Uzo Kalu, a sitting senator, sentenced to 12 years in correctional service facility. This brings to 3 the number of former governors serving various jail terms in the country. Jolly Nyame of Taraba State and Joshua Dariye were convicted in 2018.
A lot of improvements are being churned out so that litigations, particularly with respect to criminal litigations, are speedily disposed of.
In terms of the compliance with what we thought was coming to revolutionize the judiciary, which is the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, I don't think the judiciary has performed very well, because cases are still largely delayed for a very long time in courts, which is the bane of our justice system.
2019 was an election year, with its attendant litigations over pre-election and election matters. Aside from pre-election matters, the 78 tribunals empaneled attended to 786 petitions that arose from the conduct of governorship, National Assembly and State Houses of Assembly elections. In its appellate jurisdiction, the Court of Appeal adjudicated on 805 appeals arising from the verdict of the tribunals in its 16 divisions across the country.
Judiciary is one of the most overworked in the world. If you go to the advanced democracies, or even comparable countries like Ghana and what have you, you will not see the number of such cases.
In 2019, it's one of the most difficult times for the Nigerian judiciary.
During the year under review, the National Judicial Council dismissed some judges, instituted 8 panels to look into allegations against 8 judges, recommended the appointments of new heads of courts, including that of the Chief Judge of the Federal High Court, Justice John Toho. As a way of demonstrating its respect for the rule of law, the federal government also directed the DSS to release the former National Security Advisor, Sambo Dasuki, and the convener of Revolution Now, Omoyele Sowore, following various court orders.
All right, many thanks to you, Dele Atumbe, for the background. Now we have the full complement of the judiciary here with us. But let me quickly introduce those in our studio to discuss justice sector in 2020 and, of course, in retrospect to 2019. We have the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice here with us, Abubakar Malami, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us, and Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Happy New Year as well.
Also with us here in the studio is the President's Center for Social Legal Studies, Professor Yemi Akinshaye George. He's also a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Good to have you with us, and good morning, Nigeria, sir.
Thank you. Good morning.
Also joining us from our Jos studio is Garba Usman Tetengi, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. He was the former Vice President Nigeria Bar Association between 2000 and 2002. He was also a former member of the National Judicial Council, NJC, between 2014 and 2018. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Happy New Year.
Good morning and Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you.
Right, as is customary here on Good Morning Nigeria, when we have a minister, what we do is, of course, to have the minister give us an overview of his or her area of jurisdiction before we now make the conversation inclusive. So we will begin with the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation. Honorable Minister, in evaluating the performance of the judiciary, of course, in 2019, of the Justice Ministry, rather, in 2019, would you say it's still the, final habitat? Or how did it fare?
Well, in terms of performance, in terms of provision of the services and delivery of the mandate of the ministry, I think the major issues for consideration in arriving at a decision as to whether it fares well or not, I think has to be rooted in multiple dimensions. If you are talking of the support relating to legislative process, you have to look at it within the mirror and the context of what are the legislations, for example, that are put in place and their effect in the overall development of the nation. If you are talking of democracy, for example, what are the support services provided by the Ministry of Justice in deepening our democracy? Looking through the legislations that were passed and indeed assented by the President at the instance of the opinion proffered by the Office of the Attorney General of Federal Ministry of Justice, we have succeeded, I believe, in deepening our democracy through the constitutional amendments, port alteration, for example. Not Too Young Tron Bill, for example, is a bill, in essence, that has deepened the accommodation of merit as against various placed in effective participation of younger ones in the electoral process. If you are talking of the support, institutional support, for example, the amendment to the Constitution that gave rise to the legislative and judicial autonomy at the state level, for example, had equally succeeded in deepening the democratic process. The same thing with an amendment to the Constitution by way of force alteration that now gave rise to efficient and speedy determination of election petition cases. The Court of Appeal, for example, has within a limited time span arising from the amendment to the Constitution succeeded in disposing over 800 cases in record time, arising from the legislative support that has been brought in place by the constitutional amendment, Port Alteration Bill. Now, if you are looking at it as well from the perspectives of the fight against corruption, I think the ministry has fared well, taking into consideration that for the first time in the history of this country, with the active support of the ministry, bringing about the desired policies, supporting the legislative process, we have succeeded as a government in enhancing the recovery of illicit funds by over 1,360%. That is by no means a great feat in terms of the successes recorded by the administration. If you are equally talking of the economic advancement of the nation, Ministry of Justice has indeed effectively supported the legislations that turn things around for the better in terms of revenue generation of the government. Take a look, for example, of the finance bill that has a component of about 7 bills: customs and excise, Companies and Allied Matters Act, Value Added Tax, among others, which in their effect and implication had a potency of indeed enhancing the revenue generation of the government by a substantial and sizable limit or enhancement thereof. So if you talk of the perhaps the security situation, for example, the Ministry of Justice had equally succeeded greatly in terms of providing the desired support by way of bringing about the desired security in the land. We were labeling witnesses to what resources are being committed in the northeast in fighting Boko Haram insurgency. So through the act of perhaps initiating judicial processes relating to acts that are seen to be perhaps inimical, that if not nip in the bud, could escalate to insecurity situation, the Federal Ministry of Justice has succeeded in presenting a case before judicial process for the court now to look into them, determine whether indeed arising from the factual situations presented are cases that required to be determined by way of proscriptions of certain organizations and associations that are perhaps maybe by the thoughts of the government that could escalate the security situation. And by that singular act, for example, of proscribing some of these organizations, you have succeeded in supporting the security situation of the nation, saving the nation the cost associated with the insecurity that may arise eventually, if not nip in the bud. So, by and large, if you are talking of a democracy, Federal Ministry of Justice has succeeded in coming up with policies that deepen our democracy. If you are talking of insecurity, the Federal Ministry of Justice is there to provide the required support to deepen our, to support our security architecture. If you are talking of economy, the Federal Ministry of Justice has indeed succeeded in supporting the desired legislative and policy decisions that could enhance the economic fortunes of the country. And then if you are talking as well of fight against corruption, the Federal Ministry of Justice is there handy in providing the desired policies that will ensure at the end of the day that the fight against corruption by the government has indeed not only succeeded, but indeed translated into turning around of the fortune of the government. So I think by and large, Federal Ministry of Justice as an institution has succeeded in all respect, in all ramifications, and had indeed covered grounds by way of providing the desired policy support platforms to enable the enhancement and development of the nation.
Based on what you've been saying, in any democratic society like ours, there has been calls for the increase of judges for speedy dispensation of justice, and the Supreme Court, called to reduce the burden on judicial officers. So some stakeholders are saying it has not been captured in the 2020 budget. Can you shed more light on that, please?
Well, if you are talking of speedy, the workload associated with the judicial system, I think it's something that you have to look at from multiple dimensions in terms of providing the desired solution. When you talk of perhaps additional courts, that translates to creation of additional infrastructure, making provisions for additional funding and finances in a situation whereby the government is battling with paucity of funds and limitations and resources. So I think in taking a decision as to whether what you require are additional justices, additional courtrooms, additional funding in the running of the judicial system, you have to factor the cost effectiveness of what initiatives you are putting across for consideration. Okay. It is simply not about, not through the process of additional courts. It's not the exclusive way through which you can address the workload associated with the judicial system. Take, for example, the issue of jurisdiction. As it is today, a simple case of 1 million naira land in contention could end up having its way up to the Supreme Court. The same thing with a commercial dispute of perhaps maybe 1 million naira. Perhaps a lot of time, resources, and energy is wasted up to the Supreme Court. So perhaps looking at the Constitution, looking at the jurisdiction of these courts, you can still factor the cost-effective elements into that decision by way of limiting the the nature of the subject matter that gets to the Supreme Court, both in terms of volume and in terms of nature. Perhaps maybe a dispute, a commercial dispute not exceeding 1 billion could terminate at the Court of Appeal at the final determination point, thereby saving the Supreme Court the trouble of looking into 1 billion naira commercial dispute. If you do that, for example, you now support it is cost effective because no cost is factored into that process, for example, and then you do not require additional justices, for example, immediately. So it is there are low-hanging fruits, if I may put it that way, that we can succeed in achieving by way of considering other options other than the options relating to having additional justices, options other than having additional courtrooms, for example, perhaps maybe looking at what we can do in terms of amending our laws, in terms of restricting the jurisdiction that what case gets to the Supreme Court and in which way and manner, among others, for example.
Are there specific portions of the law that we could amend, with regards to this?
Well, for example, when we felt there was need for accommodating the younger ones in terms of participating in the political landscape, we look into the Constitution, look at those constitutional provisions that impede the participation by way of age limit and make necessary amendment to it. Now, the jurisdiction of the Federal High Court, for example, the jurisdiction of all court of records, inclusive of the Supreme Court, is statutorily regulated. So it is a matter of looking into those statutory provisions, either constitutional or otherwise, looking into the jurisdiction and see what we can do by way of making necessary alterations to the Constitution or necessary amendments to the law to accommodate those possibilities.
All right. If you've talked about in the different areas in which the Ministry of Justice has helped to provided support and of course deepened democracy, as of course your office is the #1 law officer for the country. In what ways have your office also helped to promote the fundamental human rights that is enshrined in the Constitution?
Well, the Office of the Attorney General has succeeded, had indeed supported the entrenchment of the human rights generally. For example, if you look at, take it, for example, from the perspectives of institutional contest, where a right of an individual is perhaps breached by an institution of government. I think this government, I'm certain this government is the first government ever in the history of Nigeria that submitted to a decision of the Human Rights Commission as it relates to Article 6, if you can rightly remember. Yeah. There was an allegation that those people were indeed unjustifiably killed by institutions of government. The Human Rights Commission handed down a decision that an amount, I think within the region of around 130 million be paid to the families of the people that were allegedly killed by an institution of government. And that decision by the Human Rights Commission was respected by the government. That was the first decision ever handed down by the Human Rights Commission, which was respected by the government ever since the establishment of the commission. That in its own right establishes what? A respect for human rights by the government of President Muhammadu Buhari. That is looking at it from the perspectives of giving effect to a decision by a commission that has never ever enjoyed the privilege of having its decision respected by the powers that be. Now, if you are looking at it from perspectives relating to compliance with the court orders as well, this is a government that believes in the supremacy, that believes in the independence of the judiciary, and indeed submitted itself to the decision of the judiciary, perhaps within the context of the rule of law. How do I mean? A decision that in all respect passed by a judicial system is we either comply wholeheartedly or go back to the rule of law by way of establishing rights that are accorded to us as a government. How do I mean? When a decision is passed, a judgment is delivered by the court, or an order or judgment is made, you have an option. One, absolute and unconditional compliance. Two, challenge to the order by way of either an appeal against the order, by way of having the order reviewed, or by way of perhaps an appealing and applying for stay of execution of the order. So in respect of those orders that we feel as a government that we are not comfortable with, we challenge. Go back to the court and have them challenge.
Are there specific cases that you want to point? Because government has come under, criticisms for, what the rights groups, consider selective, respect for some court judgments.
Perhaps maybe I have to clear the air for you to appreciate the way the rule of law operates within the context of the Nigerian situation and the Nigerian constitution. We have multiple and plethora of judicial decisions that establishes a fact that when you are challenging a court order through judicial process that handed the court order, the idea of disobedience or a challenge of disobedience to that court order does not arise. So the misapprehension that's set into the system and that has been deliberately perhaps been put in the public space is the fact that once there is a court order, you must unconditionally comply. You can only be adjudged being in disobedience of a court order when you do not take advantage of the constitutional powers, rights, and privileges accorded by you of appealing against them, against the orders, and perhaps seeking for stay of execution of the order. Or perhaps you do not take any steps seeking for variation of the court orders. When an order is made, and then as a government, individual, or a corporate body, you are dissatisfied with the order, you take steps to challenge it by way of an appeal and seeking post execution, by way of seeking for variation of the order, or by way of setting the order aside, until that matter is determined, until that your right of challenge is determined up to the Supreme Court level, the idea of you being charged with disobedience of the court order does not arise.
In the case of Dasuki and Showore, were there variations in the court order? Did you seek variations?
There were applications for setting asides. There were appeals. There were applications for stay of execution all through. So until those matters reached the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court takes a final decision relating thereto, you are still operating within the ambit, within the context of the rule of law, because the rule of law in the context, in a situation whereby an order or judgment is being contested, is a submission to the court for the purpose of seeking one relief or the other as it relates to the order that has been granted. So I think it is important now to understand clearly how the rule of law operates within the context of the Nigerian situation, within the ambit of our constitutional law, within the ambit of our statutory provisions.
Okay. Talking about rule of law and ensuring that people get justice, the Criminal Act 2015 and the Correctional Services Act 2019 was signed into law by Mr. President last year. So what kind of synergy are you having with the head of the correctional agencies and all that to ensure that people get speedy dispensation of justice and don't stay on a waiting trial for ages before they now get it?
You see, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, for example, and the Correctional Service Act, among others, were innovations by this government to bring about the desired speed in the administration of justice, inclusive of Order 6, Executive Order number 6, that relates to the restriction of movement of people accused of, charged before the court of corruption cases. So within the context of the three, the Correctional Service Act, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, and Executive Order Act, the intention and desire was to bring about the enhanced speed in the determination of cases. Before coming into place of this administration in 2015, we had cases that were pending in court for 10 years. Criminal cases, high-profile criminal cases, for 10 years without moving an inch, other than perhaps maybe arraignment. The idea of determination by way of calling witnesses, taking witnesses, and have the matter adjudicated one way or the other was all through being truncated, strangulated, and